It's totally okay if you have not installed Eclipse yet, but please try to make sure you install it before the next session. The IDE installation instructions are on our website. If you guys have any questions throughout this lesson that you feel was not clarified or was not answered, please send me your questions through the form on our website. We will then host a Zoom call to address all your questions and answer any other questions you may have. Now, this first lesson is going to be less coding and more understanding. I know that you guys want to code as soon as possible, but in order to do so, it is important that we get some basics cleared and out of the way. Again, feel free to take notes, jot down important concepts, or remember everything in your head. So I'm going to today talk about Java and the basic parts of Java. So what is Java? Java is an object-oriented programming language, which means that it has four main criteria: abstraction, polymorphism, encapsulation, and inheritance. Now, these words are probably all very familiar to you guys, but for now, let's begin talking about what an object is in object-oriented programming. To begin talking about an object, it's important to know what a class is. A class stores code and it serves as a template for every instance of this certain class that is created. Every instance of this class will have similar behavior because they all have the same template, which is that class. Now this class serves as a stencil. So you can think about it as when you are using your stencil to draw something, for example. The shape is going to be the same for all of the drawings that you create because you are using the same stencil. But you might have different colors or different designs or different outlines on your drawing. Those different aspects is what makes every object unique. But the fact that it's still the same drawing is what we call the class or the template. So an object is structurally, it's a block of memory in the heap space. It takes up some memory in a certain place or memory we call heap space. This object consists of methods and fields. It stores the data that it has in fields, and the job that needs to be completed is done through the methods. Now, I know these are two very unfamiliar terms to you. We will go over these in the coming slides. An object is developed from a template, or the template which we call a class. So now you might be hearing me say instance of a class, instance. Now you might be wondering, what is instance? Instance is one structure or one copy of a given template, the template being the class and the instance or the copy being the object. Now here on the right, you can see an image of an object, which is the person, and all the attributes or template it may have. Every person has hair, every person has eyes, every person has skin, every person has a certain height and weight. So each object or each person has a different color hair, different color eyes, different color skin, different height, and different weight. The fact that we're still a person is the class, and the instance of a class is all the different people there are out there with different characteristics. Now, these are important Java keywords as we move on later in the Java language. These are important to note as you are coding to not mix them up with the variable names that you have created. You will know when you are using a Java keyword because the word will become purple text color on your Eclipse IDE. Now, you've heard me say classes and you've heard me talk about objects. Where are these classes and objects stored, and how are they stored? Now, I want to give you a workspace introduction. So this is on your Eclipse IDE, your whole layout of all the code and the different organization methods there are. So first of all, your entire workspace is called WORKSPACE. Then inside your workspace, you have something called a project. It is this, for example, this is a project, this is a project. All these folders that you see here are projects. Inside a project, you have a package. This is where you're storing all your files. Inside your package, you have different files and programs, which are called classes, that you can store as the method of organization. Now, our first exercise is going to be to set up your workspace. So if you go to your Eclipse IDE and you right-click on the Package Explorer left-hand side of your screen, you will notice that you'll have to right click and you will click New Java Project. You will name this Java project as Java Basics. Make sure that the first letter is lowercase. We will talk more about conventions in the upcoming slides, but make sure you have named it correctly. Secondly, you're going to create a package inside your project. You're going to name your project as Lesson 1. Make sure the L is capital. Once you've created your package, you want something to go inside your package, so you're going to create a class. The class is going to be named Hello World. Now let's talk about some important parts of the computer before we move on to the entire objects and class part. Where objects and classes are stored and run is where the CPU and RAM come in. You may have heard of CPU and RAM, which is great. I'm just going to give a brief overview and move on. CPU is called Central Processing Unit. It runs and executes all the program and code that you have created in your laptop. RAM, on the other hand, is called Random Access Memory. This is where you are storing all your code and all your files. So basically what happens is Java will go to RAM and be like, hello, I want to rent some space. Can you please allot some space for me so my owner can store all of his or her files here? So basically RAM is going to allot some space for the Eclipse IDE Java for you to store all your files in that memory area. So here's an example of your CPU, and this is an example of your RAM in your computer. Now let's talk about where the classes are stored. Now we know they're stored somewhere in the RAM, but there are different sections of the RAM where different areas and different things are stored. The heap space is where your objects are stored. All the instances of the class you have created, that is where the objects are stored. On the other hand, any variables or reference holders that you have created in your program will be held in the thread stack area. Now I will go into more detail about what is exactly in the thread stack area, you heard me say reference, and I will go into more detail in that. Now let's talk about some conventions. So as I mentioned before, classes always start with an uppercase letter, packages start with lowercase letters, statements always end with semicolons. Now you can see here I have a statement and I have ended it with a semicolon. A double forward slash means that it is a comment line, so this is where you can write notes about your program or anything that you want a reader who is reading your program to understand. If you want to comment out an entire block of code, for example, you don't want to delete the code, you may want to use it later, but you don't need it right now, you can use a comment code where it is a slash and an asterisk followed by all the code that you want commented with a asterisk and then a slash. Make sure that you are using the correct order because otherwise you will get a syntax error. Now, speaking of syntax, syntax is the structure of the program. It's the grammar and the rules of Java and the Java language. So basically, in grammar, when you have certain rules, like if you have a singular verb, it's corresponding with a singular subject, and so on and so forth. That is very similar, but in terms of Java. So some enclosure symbols you should know. There are parentheses, braces, and brackets. Now, I don't need you to know the exact usage of each one of these, but I do want you to know that each of these are used for a different purpose. Now let's talk about variables. Variables are inevitable. They're in every part of a programming language, and the Java language is no different. Variables are merely storage spaces. If I have 20 erasers and I want to store the number 20 in num erasers, I'm going to use an equal to sign, which is called an assignment operator. So I'm saying the number of erasers is 20. The variable is always on the left-hand side, and the value that we want it assigned to be is on the right-hand side. Now let's talk about variable types. Variable types is like saying if I wanted to store 20, for example, in my num of erasers, 20 is integer type. So I'm going to say int num of erasers equals 20. We always want to specify the type so the variable knows, okay, I'm getting integer type, so I want to make sure I have the correct number of storage so I can store this number correctly. Each one of these primitive types that you see here has a different amount of storage according to the type that it has. For example, double has 8 bytes of data, and double holds decimal values such as 4.0, 76.53, 65.4. These are all examples of decimal values or double type. Integer, on the other hand, is 5, 10, 20, 30, 50, 70. These are all examples of integers. Boolean is your simple binary 0, 1, true, false, yes, no. Boolean always returns a true value or a false value. Character, short for char, is a single quotation mark with a single letter or number inside of it, versus string, which can have multiple letters and multiple words inside of it and close with double quotations. Make sure for both character and string that you have an opening and closing quotation, so again, you won't get syntax errors. Along with primitive type, there's also an object type that can be defined for a variable. You just need to know for now that there are two types of different kinds of type that you can assign to a variable, but we will get into the object type later, which is why it's left blank for now. Now, let's go on to exercise number 2. We're going to print a statement. Now, the classic, common, good luck rule is that we start with hello world. I'm sure you've written hello world in different languages before this, but just for good luck, we're going to start with hello world today. Print line, basically, you're seeing this says system.out.println. Now you're wondering, there's so many dots and so many different words here that I do not know. All we need to know right now is that print line is a method. A method is a block of code that does a job. So print line is going to do some sort of job. And here it's just going to print whatever's in our parentheses. Hi guys, so I have Eclipse open here, and you can see that inside the public static void main method, I'm going to start coding. If by chance you do not have this method inside your file, please feel free to add it. Just make sure you are adding these exact words. I will give you 30 seconds to add it if you have not added it yet. Alright guys, as you can see, I have added a comment line so it's easier for me to understand which exercises I am doing. This is completely optional if you do not want to do it. To start off our print statement, we're going to create a system.out. Our method, which is print line. Inside, we're going to add the message that we want. In this case, we're going to write hello world. Hello world. Now, as you can see, there is a red X here, which means I do have a syntax error. As we mentioned before, it's always important to add a semicolon. Now that I've added the semicolon, the syntax error has gone away. Congratulations guys, you have created your first program in Java. Now let's go back to the slides. Now that we have created our first program in Java, we're going to talk about some of the important parts of an object that make coding a very vital part of the object-oriented programming part. The constructor method. This method name will be the same as the class name always. You are not allowed to change the method name, otherwise it's no longer a constructor method. A constructor method is something that every object has, no matter what. It does not have a return type, like other methods, which we will discuss later on. It is non-static, which is also another term we will be discussing later in lesson 2. You can always have more than one constructor method with the same header. This is called an overloaded constructor method. We will talk more about same headers, different headers, and what a header is very soon. So when you create an object, the first thing that will be executed is your constructor method. The access modifier should always be public, as you can see here. Now, talking about access modifiers, there are a few modifiers that we should be aware of. Public, which any person in any other class with any user can access. Private, which only the same class can access. And protected, which other classes or files in the same package are able to access, as well as subclasses. Now you guys have successfully completed your first lesson of Intro to Java Basics. To recap what we learned in this lesson, we learned about objects and classes, workspace introduction, CPU and RAM relating to Java, heap space and thread stack area, conventions, variables, and basic keywords in Java. Here are some optional exercises you guys can do to supplement what we have learned so far. These are not going to in any way affect your progress in the competition. This is just for your own personal practice. Thank you guys for listening. See you in the next lesson.